Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Transform with AI. My name is Manju Devdas. I'm the founder and CEO of Pluto 7. With me, I have Dr. Vyas. He's been a great friend and has been in the supply chain journey for some time with me. And of course, he's been on a journey much longer with an amazing background, which I'll give you a quick glimpse of. First of all, welcome, Dr. Vyas. You have an amazing background. As I read through your bio, I had a hard time picking what to highlight and what not to. Everything looks amazing. Now, for the viewers, Dr. Vyas is an educator, global thought leader, an author, keynote speaker, American Society for Quality Fellow, chair of the ASQ Lean Division, and legal advisor to leaders in the world supply chain and global trade practice and policy. Dr. Nick Vyas is also the founding executive director of the USC Marshall's Kendrick Global Supply Chain and has been bestowed with the Supply Chain Leader Award of Excellence by APEX, the premier professional association for supply chain management. APEX has recognized Dr. Vyas for his work and contribution defining the next generation of supply chain leaders. And on behalf of Pluto 7 and myself, we are so grateful to having Dr. Vyas here with us to shed light on the current state of supply chain and how we can continue to shape and innovate for what's next. With that, once again, welcome, Dr. Vyas.
Thank you, Manju. Glad to be with you.
So, Dr. Vyas, the supply chain world has changed quite a bit in the last few weeks. It would be great to hear from you. How do you see the world? How things have changed, not just in the last few weeks, and maybe even with how it has been changing since the pandemic?
Well, so Manju, if we look at the world of supply chain, it has actually has transformed over the last 35, 40 years dramatically. So if we look at the globalization that has really spurred the growth of our world economy, underneath it, underpinned, it was a supply chain. But for last 38 of those 40 years, nobody knew. It was really transparent, like the way we would like to see. But March 2020, that changed. And not only changed for us in the US, but changed for the rest of the globe when the pandemic shut down and created a massive disruption, right? And one can actually blame the pandemic, but the pandemic is just sort of a trigger point. We had our structural deficiencies in supply chain for a long time. We just ignored it. We just hope that we never have to face that. So what that did basically is created this huge end-to-end disruption. So today, not only people don't know what supply chain is, people actually know at every level, from fifth graders, third graders, to the grandparents. They all know the reason something is not working in their lives is because something to do with supply chain. So we have come a full circle, not knowing anything about supply chain, to now everybody knows that there's something's wrong with the supply chain because they're not getting something that they want today.
Thanks, Dr. Vyas. Now that's amazing how in such a short window we ended up educating the whole world in our own different ways, and everybody learned in the process of what supply chain fundamentals are. Now, as we work with many customers, Pluto 7 and some of our partners like Google, when we work with many enterprises, there is different levels of understanding of supply chain components, supply chain, how it's designed, what it was intended to design, to how it needs to be designed or redesigned for future. As we are discussing this with various enterprises, so they are bringing many aspects in terms of how should they think about the supply chain as they redesign. When they're talking about the redesign, they are constantly reading about the trade shifts. They're dealing with vendors and partners and how borders are affecting them. They're thinking about the security of the data transfers between environments. and between geographic regions, how the data should be shared or exchanged. And then they're looking at the implications, obviously, to the physical world of the vendors and partners, ecosystem changing. When you look at all these things, what is your advice to the business leaders on how they go about thinking about this over the coming years? Especially you have a view of dealing with all continents practically.
And that's an interesting question, right? I mean, I've written and spoke about this subject substantially about what I consider the post-pandemic supply chain network design to be decoupling of supply chains without deglobalizations. Meaning, I want to make sure that we're clear that when we have these conversations about redesigning of supply chain, at no point the new network design should focus on localizing your supply chain for the sake of it and walking away from the globalization. So just that being said, I think under the decouplings of supply chain, I think what we're likely to see, and what I'm hoping, that the C-suites of these multinational companies will start to focus on it, that how do we design our supply chain network that provides multiple things at the same time. So let's talk about that. Last 40 years, most of the C-suite's focus on the supply chain was the cost. Get me the cheapest way to source something, get me the cheapest way for that to actually get to my customer and improve my margins. And we did really well. We really streamlined our supply chain network to accomplish that. However, if you think about it, we did not factor in other critical variables that we should be thinking about it. What are those variables? So let's talk about the first and foremost, resiliency or agility within the supply chain. So we talk often about the what if scenarios. What if natural disaster were to strike? What if the pandemic? So COVID is not a new news to the humanity. We have dealt with pandemic before, we just never took it seriously, right? You look at the geopolitical tension, you look at the natural disaster. All of these things has to be built into your network, and that's your resiliency or agility, right? But then on the other side of it is how do I actually tap in to the data transparency and making sure my supply chains are transparent enough so that I am also delivering on sustainability. If we as a human species don't learn from last 2 years that the vulnerability that exists and structural deficiencies that exist in our supply chain network, I have news for you. That if we do not address the sustainability the same way that we need to address the resiliency and efficiency, we may come to the point where we have passed the threshold of returning back to the normal. And then the cost associated with the consequences of not taking care of our ecosystem, I think could be a huge loss to humanity, not only financially, I think, but its core existence could be challenged.
Dr. Vyas, you highlighted some very, very key aspects here. Resiliency, sustainability, business continuity. These are, at least how I heard from enterprises, were concepts 2-3 years back. And while everybody always has a business continuity plan, now those continuity plan is only based on how good is based on the history it's built on. Now, when you have less common historic events, then the continuity plan gets disrupted. One of the things that I'm seeing is while cost management and profitability is going to be an essential part for many companies, the sustainability is starting to rank higher, because it's not just about making sure you're doing the right thing for the customer, being compliant, also being building the right brand view when it comes to the customer. So these things are getting now interconnected and making them go back and look at these supply chain network designs and to be able to track the products from farm to plate or whatever those variations are. When you think about these and when you look at the challenges these executives face today, they still have to solve the very fundamental problems as they think about these designs. What is your view on how they should think about now with the new order of the world on how things are operating? How should they think different about demand sensing, demand forecasting, or even planning their supply?
Yeah, so I think we post-pandemic world of supply chain. If you look, if I were to do the horizon scan, I think there are a couple of things that I see in short term, near term, and the long term, right? And if we look at it in each of those three categories, short term, I think there's instability, the instability that we see in geopolitical crisis between Ukraine and Russia, for example, and potentially even future events. I mean, they're likely to pop up. That could disrupt significantly. These are the elephants in the room that the executives simply cannot ignore. They have to address, right? I mean, there is a probabilistic model between China and Taiwan conflict or other geopolitical crises that could be boiling up somewhere. So how do you consider that as your strategic objective? Then you start to go into the near term, where digitization of our supply chain. Listen, the pandemic did not slow down the digital transformation. If anything, it actually accelerated. Humanity has adopted the digital platform as a means of life. What they buy, what they source, what they procure, how they live their life. Now the digital systems have become very integral part of that. And this trend will continue. So the evolution we see in the digital frontiers are accelerating at the rapid rate, right? And that's not going away, right? All while you're now dealing with these what-if scenarios and resiliencies in the short term, digitization in the near term. Long term, if I were to look at it, is that if you have the leadership running the company that just wishes that these things that I just spoke about just goes away and fades away in a backdrop, I have news for them, that they will have a rude awakening. They will be destroyed by the market forces much faster than the historical trend of companies going out of business. So I think if there is such thing as a wake-up call, I think wake-up call has gone up about 18 to 20 months ago, and now it's about ongoing reminder. I'm continuing to write and speak about this issue and trying to bring this awareness that these are the forces to be reckoned with, and those they'll embrace and take this bull by the horn will actually be the warriors and champions of the future supply chain.
Yeah. Dr. Vyas, I had the pleasure and honor of having the conversation at the very beginning of the pandemic. I don't know if you can call it very beginning, March of 2020, where at that time you mentioned about the bullwhip effect and you said what could happen. And now, like you said, you gave the signal of the wake-up call 2 years back, and then we saw it happen. Now, as I myself worked with many enterprises and on the spectrum of Fortune 500 companies, there's a small subset who saw the wake-up call early on, and they started acting on it much before many others. And now there's a lot more of them acting on it, right? Now, the common themes that we hear today are the following, right? In the context of digital transformation, it's not just the digital aspect of it, even the physical transformations are happening, how they're thinking about the DCs, the transportations, the labor force, and all of those things. But when you look at digital transformation, you have been both on the enterprise side and the academic side, and also you have advised governments in multiple regions. As you look at these transformation, where the rubber is hitting the road as we talk to customers now is, you touched upon this a little bit, There's a strategic plan and there's a tactical plan. And as you look at the strategic and tactical plan, the executives are now battling with, they have different systems, they have different processes for plan, make, source, deliver. They sometimes are disconnected between the strategic and execution. In this digital transformation, as they think about the network that you mentioned, they're thinking about how can I collapse these things together. They anchor to concepts like digital twin and many such control towers or command centers. At the end of the day, it's like, tell me what's happening in the physical world faster, better, and guide me because I run out of capacity in my head to make all the exception decisions. What's your advice to the executives in this capacity who are battling with all these things?
Well, I think when we talk about the digital transformation, we have to understand the emerging technologies within that space, right? So you look at the AI, the role of AI, you look at the role of machine learning, you look at the role of distributed ledger capabilities to the use of blockchain, right? So if you think about these things individually, they're gigantic forces. But when you couple all of these things together and you start to look at it from end-to-end supply chain, all of a sudden, it provides you an incredible opportunity to transform the supply chain. Remember, the supply chains are traditionally laden with incredible amount of friction, inefficiencies, right? But 4 years ago, when I did the study, I concluded that about 35% of our cost in supply chain is actually attributed to the inefficiencies and frictions within the supply chain. Now you think about this is a multi-trillion-dollar industry. And if you're laden with 35% of inefficiencies and friction, how much resources you're wasting, right? And I'm not even going into the frontier of calculating the carbon footprints and impact on environment and those things, because if you add those things, I would even venture to say that it's over 50%. But just start with the smaller number of 35%. How do we try to focus and try to tap into this capability, right? Where we have this enormous data sets that exist in this physical world, right? Things are being populated with trillions and trillions of bits of data. How do I take that information, normalize it, and actually draw some insight into it, either predictive or prescriptive, and make my business decision, right? If I start with that, I can actually even embrace the future where I don't even have to make smaller decisions. I can actually model it and allow those models to make some of those basic decisions, and all I do is manage the exception. So if you, for example, let me give you a very specific example of what do I mean by that. This Ukraine and Russia conflict, right? If you think about the food supply chain, right? Between the wheat, maize, sunflower oils, and some of the key commodities, between those two countries, it's over 25% on average in all of those subsequent categories. That was the data in a physical world. You can model the probability of this dispute either escalating into the war like it did, or escalating but not actually in a full-fledged war, or not actually escalating at all. And through those data points, the algorithms could have helped you using AI, ML, and the capabilities that it has today to guide you and say, hey, we need to circumvent some of the things, or we need to have what if scenarios played out, or we need to reduce the risk in this area and reshuffle our supply chain network. So the idea here, Manju, is what I'm thinking that there's so much intelligence exists in technological capabilities. It is going to be very crucial for the executives to start to understand, get familiarized with it, right? And you don't have to be the coder or the programmer or the chief data scientist. Surround yourself with those intelligent people, partners like yourself, and let's make the right decisions. Let's use this data. Let's use this digital world of ours and try to bridge the gap between the physical reality and the digital capability and run your enterprises so they're intelligent enterprises. They're not physical process driven, albeit everything is physically managed, but how do we bring the intelligence on the top layer and draw those insights so that you are much better positioned to reduce some of the disruptions that we have faced.
Thanks for demystifying many of the concepts that many times when I hear in the market, the way the market hype sometimes is AI is magical. It's none of those, but it's really what you mentioned, which is the reducing the exceptions. We are putting the burden on humans. We optimize the supply chain with brilliant concepts like lean, which have evolved over decades, and they'll continue to serve its purpose. Yes, now let's overlay that with leveraging more data, building intelligence, augmenting humans. This is not, again, replacing humans. Humans are making more and more exception decisions when these scenarios that you just described, whether it's the Ukraine scenario or the COVID scenario or many other possible scenarios, like you said, disruptions will happen. How do you bring this into the enterprise where it's a pragmatic blend of what has been done well, process optimization, cost optimization, but look from the new perspectives of sustainability and those things overlaid properly with the right balance and introducing these intelligence. Now, one thing, this is somewhat odd when I bring it up in a conversation like this. When it comes to dealing with a lot of data, the final decisions somehow, and this I want to hear your perspective, when you mean inefficiencies that exist, we see that the decision still lies with the humans, the planners, the inventory, the merchandise planners, and they run it in Excel, in spite of having all sophisticated systems. Do you have an advice on how to handle change management to take them to the new world, right? When I say change management is, your organization has been doing a lot of it, right? As the students that come out of USC have a very good blend of supply chain and this new tech that you spoke about. How do enterprises deal with change management, taking their employees to the next level?
Well, I think we talked about the evolution and the speed of evolution. So it's not just in the physical and digital world, this evolution needs to happen, but in human capital, right? If you are not accelerating that talent management part of your business, where you either internally or through partnering with institutes like ourselves, upgrading the human capability matrix, providing those additional skills that are essential for them to understand the changing world and the forces that we have to be reckoned with, it will be disaster. Because at the end of the day, people drive the company, culture drives the company, knowledge drives the company. So if you do not update, and I'm not talking about updating by just getting a master's degree or PhD, I'm talking about a continuous learning environment within your company, understanding and embracing what are the new trends, micro, macro trends that everybody should be aware of it. And not making them specialized in any one given area, but at least giving them a sense of understanding of how confluence of all of these forces can impact their lives and lives of the companies and the stakeholder and shareholder. It'd be a huge deficit. So my recommendation would be, we are training the next generation's leader at USC in my program, Masters of Science in Global Supply Chain Management. But I have 125 batch of students. The cohort is 125. Supply chain industry has a deficit, net deficit for the last 10 years. We need everyone to really focus on upgrading, upskilling the human talent. So I hope that smaller, partnering with us, for example, and just having once or 6 months a small 8-hour seminar, or break that into 2 4-hour seminar once a year, but going over the very conversations you and I are having, make that available to your senior frontline leaderships, middle management, so that they are also updated and they're aware of the surrounding ecosystem's impact on their businesses.
Dr. Vyas, I'm sure a lot of the enterprises who are listening to this would love to leverage that. I'm myself very aware of the studies that you have done as a part of your doctorate in terms of the learning experience evolution and how it's benefited not only your students and maybe some of this you're reflecting in your books that you have written as well and helping multiple, advising many countries. To the audience, I would suggest you take a look at some of Dr. Vyas's work and take some of your learnings and reach out to him as well. With that, Dr. Vyas, is there anything you want to conclude as a part of this conversation, as a takeaway for our audience?
Well, Manju, I think I want to thank you, first of all, to inviting me to this amazing conversation. I think you're doing some incredible work in terms of the transformation and providing that solutions, I think will be very useful for the enterprises. So keep up the good work. It was great to be with you. And to my audience, look forward to staying in touch. I obviously follow me on LinkedIn or reach me out if I can be of any help.
Great. We'll be sharing the tags and hashtags for USC and Dr. Vyas in the last slide. Look out for that. And Dr. Vyas, thank you for your time again. It's a pleasure and honor to have you on our session.
Thank you.